Okay, so today we're going back to the narrative. We had finished the book of Isaiah. Took all summer to do that. And so now we're going to go back to the Kings and Chronicles and resume the narrative. We're not going to make it very far before we bump up against the next batch of prophets. We're basically going to get through the kingship of Manasseh and Amon, his son, who only reigned for 2 years. And ended with Josiah. We're going to actually get about halfway through Josiah's reign. And there's only a couple of chapters in Kings and Chronicles, so this will be pretty easy compared to what we just got done with Isaiah. Now, I don't believe, if I remember correctly, as I've been going through this section of Kings and Chronicles, of course, I've been pausing and then taking these detours into the various prophetic books. And I haven't gone back and looked at my videos. This is August 17, 2022. I am a year behind in my uploading. Okay, so like in my actual making of the videos, like I'm doing right now, here I am in the latter chapters, the latter chapters of Kings and Chronicles. In my uploading these videos, I'm only in Joshua, which I did, I think, a year ago, like last August or something. So I'm way behind in actually uploading these videos. And I got to Isaiah around the end of May this year, so about 3 months ago, a little less than 3 months ago, and I spent all summer working on Isaiah. And like I said, as I've been pausing in the narrative and kind of taking these detours into the various prophetic books, I have at times kind of lost track of where I've been in the narratives when I go back to them. I think I've covered everything, but except for 2 Kings 17, I don't think I ever read 2 Kings 17, which details the fall of the northern kingdom. Now that we're definitively of course, the reason for this is that the various prophets that I have read so far all lived before the fall of the northern kingdom, or at least it happened during their lifetimes. Even Isaiah began his ministry in 740 BC, the year King Uzziah died, and the northern kingdom didn't fall until 722 BC, 18 years or so after that. And his first part of his prophecy does talk about the northern kingdom. In fact, one of the major events in the beginning of Isaiah is his confrontation with King Ahaz of Judah, the southern kingdom, about a dispute or a fight or a war that Ahaz is having with the northern kingdom and the northern kingdom's ally at the time, Syria. So, and that's a major part of the first part of Isaiah. So, the prophets that we've read before have all, Amos and Hosea, ministered to the northern kingdom. Okay, their entire ministries were to the north. And so all the prophets, and even Micah and Isaiah, who did not minister to the north, were still, their ministries were conducted at least partially while the north was still around, the northern kingdom was still around. So now we are definitively past that. All the prophets that we read from this point forward are going to be coming along after the northern kingdom has fallen. The northern kingdom is definitively in the past at this point in the story going forward. So I'm going to go ahead and read 2 Kings 17, just in case I haven't done so before. Because I don't think I have. I think I've been kind of dancing around this chapter, but now it's time to go ahead and read it so we have the context for the fall of Israel and how that affected the life in the country going forward after that. 2 Kings 17. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hosea, son of Elah, became king of Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 9 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, but not like the kings of Israel who preceded him. We don't really know what that means. There's some speculation. We did read the account of Hezekiah back before we got into Isaiah. And Hezekiah had a Passover early in his reign, and he even had people coming from the north to that Passover. Depending on whether you think Hosea was king at that time, it could be that Hosea allowed the northerners to go to Israel or Judah to celebrate the Passover, whereas previous northern kings would not allow them to do that. I don't know. Or maybe there were other things that he did that were not as bad as previous kings. I don't know. The text just doesn't say. Anyway, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up to attack Hosea, who had been Shalmaneser's vassal, and had paid him tribute, so he obviously rebelled at some point. But the king of Assyria discovered that Hosea was a traitor, for he had sent envoys to So, king of Egypt. And he no longer paid tribute to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore Shalmaneser seized him and put him in prison. That seems to have the opposite effect. The king of Assyria invaded the entire land, marched against Samaria, and laid siege to it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. This is in 722, 721 BC, according to our calendars, and deported the Israelites to Assyria. He settled them in Halah, and Gozan on the Habor River, and the towns of the Medes. All this took place because the Israelites had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of Egypt from under the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. They worshipped other gods and followed the practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before them, as well as the practices that the kings of Israel had introduced. That would be primarily the golden calf that Jeroboam set up at the very beginning of his reign, the very beginning of the kingdom. The Israelites secretly did things against the Lord their God that were not right. From watchtower to fortified city, they built themselves high places in all their towns. Those are the altar sites, the worship sites, which they usually put up on tops of hills. They set up sacred stones and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. At every high place they burned incense, as the nations whom the Lord had driven out before them had done. They did wicked things that provoked the Lord to anger. They worshipped idols, although the Lord had said, "You shall not do this." That's one of the commandments. That goes back to the very beginning. The Lord warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and seers. And we've been reading some of that. Now, a lot of those prophets didn't write anything down, at least nothing that we have today. We've been reading some of their names. Elijah and Elisha, for example, came along during that time, and they ministered to the north. Jonah ministered to the north, although the book we have that has his name on it isn't about his ministry to the north. We had Amos and Hosea ministered to the north, and their books are still in our canon to this day. And we read a lot of people, some of them didn't even get names, that came and went, and there would have been others. We read a lot of this whole school of prophets. And they wouldn't have all been inspired by the Holy Spirit directly. Most of them would have just been like students or disciples that took the prophet's word and tried to teach it to whatever degree they could. But God didn't leave them without a witness. There are plenty of people who were coming along during that time that were speaking the truth that the kings and the people just did not want to hear. The Lord had warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and seers, "Turn from your evil ways. Observe my commands and decrees, in accordance with the entire law that I commanded your fathers to obey, and that I delivered to you through my servants the prophets." But they would not listen, and were as stiff-necked as their fathers. That refers to a stiff neck in this culture and context refers to an ox that just won't turn when you try to pull it to turn as you're driving it through the fields. So you have a stiff neck, it means you're not accepting correction when someone tries to turn you around and get you to go a different direction. As stiff-necked as their fathers, who did not trust in the Lord their God. They rejected his decrees and the covenant he had made with their fathers and the warnings he had given them. They followed worthless idols and themselves became worthless. They imitated the nations around them, although the Lord had ordered them, "Do not do as they do." And they did the things the Lord had forbidden them to do. So this is their fault. All the responsibility for what happened here in this disaster is on them. They forsook all the commands of the Lord their God, and made for themselves 2 idols cast in the shape of calves, and an Asherah pole. They bowed down to all the starry hosts, and they worshipped Baal. They sacrificed their sons and daughters in the fire. They practiced divination and sorcery, and sold themselves to do evil in the eyes of the Lord, provoking him to anger. So the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah was left. And even Judah did not keep the commands of the Lord their God. They followed the practices Israel had introduced. Therefore the Lord rejected all the people of Israel. He afflicted them and gave them into the hands of plunderers, until he thrust them from his presence. When he tore Israel away from the house of David, and that goes all the way back into the end of Solomon and the beginning of Rehoboam, his son. That would have been in 930 BC, so 200 years earlier. When he tore Israel away from the house of David, they made Jeroboam, son of Nebat, their king. Jeroboam enticed Israel. Now, he had given Jeroboam permission to be king, and Jeroboam tried to seize the kingship for himself prematurely, so the people just made him king afterwards. Jeroboam enticed Israel away from following the Lord and caused them to commit a great sin. The Israelites persisted in all the sins of Jeroboam and did not turn away from them, until the Lord removed them from his presence, as he had warned through all his servants the prophets. So the people of Israel were taken from their homeland into exile in Assyria, and they are still there. The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them. Now these are the same, some of them, or at least, are the same cities. Remember how we read through Isaiah, and we read about the confrontation they had with the field commander who was representing the king of Assyria? And he came to them and said, where are the gods of Hamath and Sepharvaim? You know, say they didn't save them, those people's gods didn't save them, and your God's not going to save you either. So these are some of the cities that the Assyrians had already destroyed. And Assyria was in control of Babylon at this time too. So the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites. So he took the Israelites away, at least a good number of them, and brought others in to replace them and mix with the survivors of Israel who were still there. And by doing so, you essentially pollute the genealogies to the degree where they're not really Israelites any longer. They're just people who happen to live in Israel. You go back far enough, and they might have some trace of Israelite ancestry in them. But the southerners, the Judahites, are not going to accept these people as fellow Israelites. They took over Samaria and lived in its towns. When they first lived there, they did not worship the Lord. How would they? They weren't Israelites. They didn't know anything about Israel's God. So he sent lions among them, and they killed some of the people. This was reported to the king of Assyria. The people you deported and settled and resettled in the towns of Samaria do not know what the God of that country requires. He has sent lions among them, which are killing them off, because the people do not know what he requires. Then the king of Assyria gave this order. Have one of the priests you took captive from Samaria go back to live there and teach the people what the God of that land requires. They would have all thought that every country and every land had its own God, and that particular God had its own demands. This wouldn't have been strange to them. This would have been a normal thing to them. So one of the priests who had been exiled from Samaria came to live in Bethel. It's one of the major cities of that country, the northern kingdom, and taught them how to worship the Lord. Nevertheless, each national group made its own gods in the several towns where they settled, and set them up in the shrines the people of Samaria had made at the high places. The men from Babylon made Succoth-Benoth, the men from Cutha made Nergal, and the men from Hamath made Ashima. The Arvites made Nibhaz and Tartak, and the Sepharvites burned their children in the fire as sacrifices to Adremelech and Animelech, the gods of Sepharvaim. They worshipped the Lord, but they also appointed all sorts of their own people to officiate for them as priests in the shrines of the high places. They worshipped the Lord, but they also served their own gods in accordance with the customs of the nations from which they had been brought. Now, in their minds, this would have been A-okay. They would have seen no problems with this. They would have seen no inconsistency or contradiction in the idea of worshiping Israel's God plus all these others. It would have fit very smoothly into their worldview to do that. To this day, whenever this was finally written down in the current form, they persist in their former practices. They neither worship the Lord, and so here he's saying they don't actually worship the Lord. A couple times previously, he said they did. So what he's really saying is that they don't. They go through the rituals that Israel's God requires, but they do not actually worship the Lord because they mix their worship with all this other stuff. They're not worshiping the Lord properly, so they're not really worshiping the Lord. They neither worship the Lord nor adhere to the decrees and ordinances, the laws and commands that the Lord gave the descendants of Jacob, whom he named Israel. When the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites, he commanded them, "Do not worship any other gods, or bow down to them, serve them, or sacrifice to them. But the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt, with mighty power and an outstretched arm, is the one you must worship. To him you shall bow down, and to him you shall offer sacrifices. You must always be careful to keep the decrees and ordinances, the laws and commands he wrote for you. Do not worship other gods. Do not forget the covenant I have made with you, and do not worship other gods. Rather, worship the Lord your God. It is he who will deliver you from the hand of all your enemies." They would not listen, however, but persisted in their former practices. Even while these people were worshiping the Lord, they were serving their idols. To this day, their children and grandchildren continue to do as their fathers did. And that's going to continue to be that way, basically, in the time of Jesus. These are the people that will come to be known as the Samaritans. In the days of the gospel, they're going to live in the area of Israel that's north of Jerusalem and Judah, and they are not going to be well liked by the Judeans who live in the south. And that's where these people come from. The mixed breed that came from the mixture of people after Assyria took Israel captive. Those people were gone. Then he brought some people from other nations he'd already conquered to live in Israel, and they mixed with the people who were still there, survivors, physical survivors still living in that land, however many there were. And that became eventually this mixed breed that the New Testament will call Samaritans. After Samaria, we add an extra T in there for some reason. But that is where those people come from, and they are not going to get along with the Southerners. There's going to be conflict and discord between these two groups of people for hundreds of years. So that is the fall of the Northern Kingdom. I don't think I have read that chapter before, so we now finally got that done. Now the next couple of chapters are about Hezekiah, and I've already read that, so we're going to skip those and go now into Hezekiah's son, Manasseh.